Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. Today we have some special guests who were most instrumental in the 200th anniversary of the Bicentennial of the City of Wadsworth, because they had Founders Day, which took us all the way back to 1814, the beginning, and a special person here was actually there in 1814, however, not in, shall we say, her present state, but genetically. Her great, 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 great grandfather was the dean of the Dean and Durhams who came here and made the first settlement in 1814. And that is Ramona Edith Wanoff. And then we have also a person who spent a tremendous amount of time getting the genealogy of just about everyone in Wadsworth for the Founders Day, and that was Terry Greenhall. Now, for the benefit of those people who are going to be doing this or seeing this program in 2064, notice that he has a spelling of his name which is a little bit different from what you would think would be. So his when it comes up on the screen, make note of that. Let's start with Ramona. Ramona, tell us a little about yourself, who you are, where you were born, who your parents were, and if you can go all the way back to 1814, that would be great, but I don't think you can.
I don't think I can unless I had it all written down. But my parents were George Edis and Laura Stauffer Edis. I was born in Wadsworth. I live in the house that I grew up in. I moved out the first 2 years I was married, but then moved back in, and we bought the house for my mom.
Now, which Stauffer was your mom? We have a lot of Stauffers in Wadsworth.
None of them are here now. It was Paul and Mabel Stauffer.
And they were here in Wadsworth?
They moved to Wadsworth as paid vocalists for the Grace Lutheran Church.
As paid what?
Vocalists.
Oh, vocalists.
They both sang,
they
and
sang.
they came here as paid vocalists. And when the Grace Lutheran Church had their big anniversary a year ago, they showed me some books, and I found how much they were paid and what they spent to buy the music.
Probably
and
not
so
too
forth.
much.
No, it wasn't like $4.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Of course, in those days, $4 would have been quite a bit of money.
Probably, but it was two people being paid.
Oh,
also,
for both of them?
For both of them, so.
Ah.
So that, and then I had grandparents. I had Lydia and Herschel Clark. He worked at the match company, had the horse, you know, did the first things at the match company. And I remember them, they lived on Pine Street. I went to Franklin School for kindergarten, and I'd go to their house every now and then for some reason, and my mother would pick me up later.
Now that would be your grandparents.
Great-grandparents.
Oh, great-grandparents.
Great-grandparents. Okay. I did not know my father's parents very well.
And their names were what?
Margaret and Walter Edis. And they died when I was around 3, and they had a daughter, Helen, who was 10, and she came to live with us then. And we grew up as almost sisters, still are.
But she was related to your father how?
Sister.
Father, sister.
She's my father's youngest
That's
sister.
Right. Helen Edith, we were in school together.
Right.
She was actually, she was the year ahead of me in school. She lives in Medina right now, doesn't she?
Yes, she lives in Medina.
And she would probably be the oldest member of the family, wouldn't she?
Yes, she is.
Because she would be now 85 years old.
Yes.
Here in 2014, she would be 85 years old. Right?
She'll be 86,
86
in April.
Oh, she'll be 86 in April.
She'll kill me for telling that.
Well, that's no. Well, in 2064, she probably won't be around to kill us.
Probably not.
We have to explain a couple things. We're taping this in the middle of winter. As a matter of fact, this is February, and people, since the beginning of time, get colds in the wintertime, and that is not an exception for us. I Have a Cold, and just about everyone who came on to the various programs, and this is the 11th of 20 that we're doing, has had, all of them, many of them have had colds. Now, Claude Edis, how was he related? Who was a very prominent person in Wadsworth?
He was brother of my grandfather, Walter. Walter and Claude were brothers.
And do you know what Claude did?
He worked at the match company, I
Well,
believe
he did more than work at the match company.
Well, I don't know.
He was an executive at the match company.
Yes, but there was some things in the family, so you really didn't know what some of them really did.
Mm-hmm.
You
Understand.
didn't see them, you know how families can be.
Understand. And tell us about your children.
My children, well,
And grandchildren.
I have 3 children. My first one is Michael, and he lives in Sharon Township.
And how old is Michael?
Oh, he just turned, well, his birthday's Thursday, and he'll be 58.
58. So 50 years from now, he'll be 108 years old.
Yeah.
And there's a possibility that he could still be living.
He has a son who is 18 and a daughter who is 12.
And those people, your daughter or your grandson, who is 18, and granddaughter, who is 12, will probably be viewing this in 2064. So say hello to your great-grandchildren.
I certainly hope to my great-great-grandchildren.
That's right, that's right.
Then I have a daughter who lives in Louisville.
Louisville, Ohio?
Ohio, which is southeast of Canton. She has a daughter, Meredith, who lives in Athens and works for the newspaper.
Ohio, right?
Yeah, works for the newspaper there and Ohio University. And I have her son is 27. He lives in Orlando, Florida, and has a good job down there. And then I have a daughter, Kimberly, who just moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Uh-huh.
Thought she'd have warm weather. Well, they've had ice recently.
That's right, exactly. Bad weather this winter, right?
Yes, yes.
But now those are the people to whom you're going to say hello in 2064 through this program. Terry, let's go to you. You have a tremendous history to tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm not a Wadsworth native.
We won't hold that against
I can't compare my
We've got a
story
lot of
with,
people like that.
with Ramona's. I was born to a Utah couple who had gone to California because of World War II, so I was born in Northern California and was raised in Utah. Joined the Army right out of college and
Where did you go to college?
went to college at Brigham Young in Provo,
Brigham
Utah.
Young.
And went into dietetics, did a dietetics internship in the Army, and some years later I had a young renal dietitian on my staff when I was chief of clinical dietetics at Walter Reed by the name of Sue Razor.
Sue Razor.
Who of course is a Wadsworth native.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point later on we decided that we were going to retire, at least I did, and we thought, well, since I'm from Utah, my parents are all there, and my relatives are there, and hers are all in Ohio, perhaps we should move somewhere in between, and we discussed it, and we went back and forth, and finally we compromised to move to her hometown.
Well, you compromised.
Big compromise.
Yes. I like that compromise. I'm glad that she won you over.
Right. So we've been here for, at least I've been here since 1988.
1988. Now you obviously married Sue Razor, right?
Yes, I did.
Now tell us a little about Sue Razor. They are an old family in Wadsworth. Been around for many, many years, and it's a large family.
Her family was one of those that came shortly after Ramona's did. I believe they showed up in August of 1814.
1814, that's right. And they actually, and you probably know much better than I, but they settled about 2.5 miles south of where the first settlers settled.
Right, out close to what they call it, the
High Church.
The High Church.
The High Church,
yes.
which would be geographically, it would be on the corner of Medina County Line Road and Eastern Road, and that would be the confines of Medina County, right where the vertex, where those two meet, is where they came.
Right.
The
In fact, I've seen some records on the family that we'll say Wadsworth, Wayne County, Ohio, you know, from that period of time.
Yes, and that's not uncommon. And the reason it's not uncommon is that when they first came, the county of Medina was not formed. We were in the
Western Reserve.
Western Reserve, but there were two other counties that were formed before Medina County. And then when Medina County was formed, they started, which would have been in 1817, I believe it was, then they started calling this Medina County. But before that, they had a Wayne County, they had a Medina County, they had a Portage County. We were in Portage County at one time. And before that, we were in the county which is in eastern part of the of Ohio, and it'll come to me in a couple of seconds now. I can't think of it right this very second. But that was the county that we were in. So that they would have designations all over the globe.
Oh, I seems like I remember seeing someplace that Wayne County at one time, before Ohio was formed, was a very large county, and Detroit was the county seat.
Right, right.
So,
well, it covered. See, it's the first settlement south of the Connecticut Western Reserve, and it was so sparsely settled that they had their county seat almost 200 miles away. They probably didn't get to go back and forth every day, more than likely. Matter of fact, most of them probably never got there to begin with, to the county seat in Detroit. Huge county, huge county. Now tell us a little bit about your family, and if anybody who's presently living is going to be around in 2064 for you to say hello to from 2014.
Well, I should say hello to my new grandson, because he's supposed to be born in about 3 days.
In 3 days.
I was going to say, is he here? Oh,
so
great.
in 3 days, and he'll be 50 years old, or he will be 50 years old in 2064, and he'll appreciate seeing his grandfather rather.
Right.
Now, this is all very, very interesting, but we have to get to the meat of what we're going to be talking about here today, and that is the Founders Day. Ramona, describe a little bit about what Founders Day was, and then we're going to dig deeply into finding out what Founders Day plans were to make it a reality when we had the Founders Day.
Wadsworth has Founders Day every year for downtown Wadsworth, a 2-day event, Friday and Saturday. So for the Bicentennial, we expanded it and made it a 4-day event, and used most of the things that downtown Wadsworth normally did, and just added to it and did different
what were
things.
those things? We have to identify.
Well, Thursday night we had the community band, a brass portion of it, play. We did the Star Spangled Banner and so forth. And then we did the ceremony of recognizing all of us.
Okay, now, how about holding that up and see if we can get a picture of it. That is, read it to us, Ramona, because that's particularly significant.
Well, it says a Connecticut Land Company in the background, and it said, the mayor and citizens of Wadsworth, Ohio, proudly recognize Ramona Wanoff as a direct descendant of Wadsworth founder Daniel Dean on this 7th day of August 2014, and it's signed by Robin Lawbaugh, the mayor of Wadsworth.
The mayor, right. Now, each of the persons who was on that was on the stage received one of those.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about that. And Terry, you might be prepared to tell us a little bit about whom we put on the stage.
All right.
And where was the stage?
Well, the stage was a flatbed truck.
Right.
So we were rather limited on the number of individuals who could be on the stage, and we had identified somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 individuals to be recipients of the recognition. And well, from a safety standpoint, we could certainly not get 90 people up on a truck bed and expect them all to remain up there throughout the course of the activities. So sort of arbitrarily picked one individual, or in a couple of cases, two individuals, to represent the families. And then the remaining individuals were seated directly in front of the stage. So as you, as General Wadsworth, read off the names, the individuals were presented with their certificates, beginning with Ramona. And when she received her certificate, then my wife and I were giving certificates to those individuals who were seated in front as you read their names.
Ramona actually was the star of the entire.
Well, she was.
Had to be, because you were the only living relative who has been here in Wadsworth all of your life, and all of the well, the Ediths all the way back to the Daniel Dean.
Right.
There's never been a break in the chain. Is that correct?
We stick around.
Yeah, stick around. They came here, and by God, they loved Wadsworth, and they're going to stay here forever. And we hope that that'll be the case in 2064 as well. That your progeny will be still living in Wadsworth, and your grandchildren, and maybe in 2064 we can say that Wadsworth has had the Dean family living here continuously for 250 years.
That would be great.
But we now have them for 200 years. So, Ramona, tell us a little bit about some of the things that we were able to do, you were able to do, as the star of the Bicentennial.
Of the whole Bicentennial. Well, I started out in 2012 on the fundraising group, and then I moved, when that was kind of finished up, I went to the events committee. And from that, I became chairman of the Founders Day Committee, which I felt was really great. I got to be Grand Marshal with you for the Blue Tip Parade to kind of kick that off.
Now, what is the Grand Marshal? Tell us what the Grand Marshal does.
The Grand Marshal, we rode on a float. I went down to
Describe the
square.
float.
We had a log cabin behind us, signs on the side. Then I got off and got in a cherry picker and lit the
Tell us what a cherry
match.
picker is.
Cherry picker is what the electric company and so forth uses to work high up in the air. But I climbed in and they put me up there and I got to light the blue tip match, which is really run by gas. So I said that was one of the highlights of my life to do that. Went right after my weddings and the birth of my kids. I love doing that. And then we moved on. I had my class reunion the week before that.
What class reunion?
My 60th for the class of 1954, and I was chairman of that. We did a 3-day event for that.
How many people came?
I probably had 45 to 50, different numbers at different events. And so then I got into the Founders Day in August, and we already talked about Thursday. So Friday was basically what downtown Wadsworth does. The Legion has a pig roast, which is very...
The American Legion.
Yes, which is very successful. And then we had some line dancers. They had a cornhole tournament, and they had a photo booth for the kids.
In the event that we don't know what a cornhole tournament is in 2064, tell us what it is.
It's a board with a hole in it, and you throw bags of corn
And try to get it
or
into the
beans
hole.
and try to get in the hole. And I've played it once, but I'm not sure what the scoring is, but people do enjoy doing that. We also had Chris Jury with his well-trained dog.
Now, Chris Jury, tell us a little bit about Chris Jury.
I don't know too much about Chris Jury, but I sure do
Jury's
like his dog Jedi.
Jedi. Chris Jury is the president of Luke Engineering, which is on South Boulevard in Wadsworth. They anodize aluminum. And I don't exactly know what they do, but that's what Chris Jury does. He's the president of that.
But he was there with his dog.
His father started it. Bill Jury started it.
The dog is so well trained, could just
I'm sorry, his
do
father-in-law
anything.
started it.
Okay.
Yeah, his father-in-law started it.
So then we had a lot of other things going on. And then we moved on to Saturday. And Saturday we opened the time capsule that we had dug up from the cemetery. And they took out all of these things. Every item was wrapped in foil, and it was so fascinating to see all of that go on. And then the VFW Auxiliary does a kids' carnival every year for Founders Day. So they did that in a parking lot that's west of the library, not the library parking lot, but it's west of the library. There's a restaurant there sometimes. And then on Sunday, we had, oh, I don't want to forget the cemetery walk too. We had high school kids dressed in costume for Saturday, and you could walk around town and they would give you a historical review. And one of them I got to talk to, and I said, oh, I got to meet my great-great-grandfather because he did John Clark, who was my great-great-grandfather. So that the kids did a spectacular job. They
were from the drama club.
From the drama club, but they were in costume and they knew everything there was to know about the person they were portraying. And on Saturday, they also stood in the cemetery and did it. And we took a cemetery walk and went through where some of these prominent people were buried. Then Sunday, we decided to close with things. So we went to St. Mark's Church, which is the oldest church in town, and it's down in the
oldest,
square.
but one of the oldest.
Well, I think it's the oldest one.
Is it?
That's why we chose it. And so we had a service there, and we had an old pump organ-like thing that you could carry around, and Brenda Baldwin played that, and we sang some hymns, and Reverend Jim Moore, who the church at one time had been a Mennonite church, and he had been minister there, so he gave us a short talk. And following that, we had an ice cream social, a pie baking contest, which few people entered. I was sorry about that. But we had pie and ice cream. Roger Havens made homemade ice cream for it.
Now, on the pie eating contest, you say that
pie
few people...
baking.
I know, but I belong to the pie eating contest.
Oh.
And there were quite a few people who were with me eating pie. Very, very good pies.
But we only had 4.
4 what?
Pies.
Oh, I thought I ate more than that.
No, we had cookies also. We had several people bake cookies, thinking the kids would like cookies better than pie. But the ice cream was a big hit.
Yeah. Now that's,
and that ended our Founders Day after 4 days.
Now, Terry, tell us about all of the, I would say, all of the research you had to do to make sure that the people who were honored that night were indeed blood relatives of the founders. I cannot believe how much you did on that.
You know, I worried a great deal that we were going to miss someone, and we perhaps did. I still don't know. I've not had anyone come up and tap me on the shoulder.
No one has come forward, and you can be assured if anybody had been overlooked, he would be here fast in Wadsworth.
But we asked through the newspaper and other media for names of individuals who were currently residents of Wadsworth, who were direct descendants of the founders. And then we sort of defined what Wadsworth was, because you know, we might have people who live in the township, we might have people who have 44281 as a zip code, but don't live in Wadsworth.
Right.
So we identified those individuals. Oh, and also Wadsworth School District. So we encapsulated, you know, as many folks as we could. Once I got the names, and you know, people said that they were indeed descendants of a founder, we took them at their word. But I also asked them if it would be okay if I did a short genealogy on them, and I put them together before you know it was over.
How many do you have?
I believe there were around 90.
90.
There may have been closer to 100,
but 90.
In fact, there were a couple of individuals that turned out were not members of founders, and I went ahead and did theirs as well. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of them, voluminous, lots and lots of information. So it was a very interesting thing, and you know, I came from a small town too, and it was one of those situations throughout my life where you find out, oh, so-and-so is so-and-so's sister. You know, I've been here for 30 years and didn't know they were sisters, that sort of thing. So I sort of got those eye-opening situations as I went through to see how people were connected in Wadsworth. You know, it was a lot of fun.
I think that someone, either you or Ramona, said that I was somewhat the master of ceremonies for that event, calling out the names and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Now, the people in the audience thought that I really knew who these people were, you know, the genealogy of them. So afterwards, and this is one of those stories that I think that will happen even in 2064. One of the ladies came up to me and she said, "I think that I'm related to the Pardees." And I said, "Well, what makes you think that you're related to the Pardees?" And she said, "Well, I had an aunt and her name was, I think her name was," then she gave me a name and said, can you figure out whether I'm related?" Well, there wasn't too much to go on, as you can understand, but I kind of like a challenge in terms of, and I hate that empty word, challenge, but nonetheless, I thought, well, I'm going to give it a try. So I did a tremendous amount of research for this woman, and came to find out she was indeed related to the Pardees. Then I knew a lot of the relatives of the Pardees. Now the Pardees were very prominent in Wadsworth, and we have a street named Pardee, and they were quite wealthy. They were lawyers and doctors and just about everything, and they married, and there were a lot of those relatives. So I told her that I was acquainted with, as a matter of fact, a very good friend of mine is indeed a direct descendant of the Pardees, because one of the Pardees married a Hard, H-A-R-D, girl, Julia Hard, and that this person was related to Julia Hard and therefore to the Pardees. And what you said a minute ago, that some people didn't realize that they had relatives, and these people not only were related, but they were in school together, and they did not know that they were they were cousins, but about 45th cousins or something like that. So this turned out to be very nice. Tell us about some of the planning. I know that you planned. I think that you had meetings. I came to a couple of those meetings. But I think that you had meetings every month for about 2 years, did you?
Oh, yes, we did. We started out with the events, and I formed my core Founders Day committee from that, and then got more people. Gosh, it took a lot of us to really get it all. Sue, and we had a big party afterwards, but Becky Pataki, we had food trucks and everything on Saturday, and Becky Pataki is excellent in getting those together. She does downtown Wadsworth, and so we have them come in frequently, so she knows where everybody needs to hook up for water or electric or whatever they need. And so we met in the First Merit Bank building, and I would say I had 8 or 10 at every meeting, and they all jumped in and helped a lot. We had Pam, Tom Stugmeyer, Jack Allen, Roger Havens was a big help.
Now, Becky Pataki, tell us a little bit about her background.
Becky was a flood.
Well, Becky Flood, and the Floods have lived in Wadsworth for,
as
well,
far back
probably
as I know.
close to 100 years.
Yes.
Close to 100 years. As a matter of fact, her Aunt Mary is still living, and she's 99. And so she wasn't born here, but I think she was a little girl when she came. So it's pretty close to 100 years that they've been in Wadsworth.
They've been here all the time that I know. So, but it took a lot of effort, and of course you need the police. You got to close off the streets. So Jack Allen was good at going to City Hall and saying, "This is what we need to do," and so the city has to say, "Yes, you can close that street off at whatever time." And so we had a lot of that logistics to work out, but everything went well.
Terry, how about it giving us a description of where the crowd sat and how many you think might have been there that night?
Oh.
Well, the stage, the flatbed truck, was located between High Street and the library in that large parking lot there. And we had a small area roped off so we could put the recipients of the recognition and their families, get them as close to the stage as we could. And then there were quite a number of individuals that sat outside of that small circle.
How far back did they go?
We had people clear back to Broad Street.
Yeah, they were in Broad Street.
How many people do you think might have been there that night?
I don't think there were as many as we had anticipated. Hopefully we were seeing more, but I don't know, maybe 300 or 400, you think?
At least that many.
I would say, because I was, of course, sitting up there on the stage, and I looked out there, and I was really surprised. So I'm trying to count rows and people. And
Yeah. Well, I actually counted.
I would say.
Because one of the things that I typically do is to count to see how many people are at an organizational meeting, because people always ask how many people came. So I did what you did. I counted all of the rows and multiplied by 22. There were 22 abroad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I went all the way back, and there was something like 60 rows.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
60 rows of 22. So we had a lot. You can do the math.
Yeah.
Terry, you're a good mathematician.
We're probably looking 1,400 by then.
1,400.
Right?
So we had about 1,400 people there.
Wow.
And then there were people standing in Broad Street. And this is probably I shouldn't say this, but it was annoying because they weren't standing still. They were walking and dancing around and so forth, and I thought it was very annoying and very disrespectful to the people who were being honored. And then the whole area that I could see from the stage, the whole area on the East Park had a lot of people. I don't know how many people. And here again, some were sitting, some were standing, some were not listening. So I guess we don't count those in, but they were all there. And it was a very hot night, an extremely hot night. And I know that for a fact because the uniform that I was wearing was about an inch thick, and honest to heavens, it was so hot. And but we endured that. Tell us a little bit about again. I mentioned a moment ago that I cannot believe how much work you did. Where did you get the information for the genealogy for some of these people?
We have some excellent resources here in Wadsworth.
What are they?
Shapiro, am I telling you?
Shapiro.
Shapiro.
Yes.
Shapiro.
Eleanor Eiler Shapiro, who was an English teacher in the Wadsworth schools in 1936-37, wrote a book, had their students write a book of the history of Wadsworth, and they had to do the research.
Right. In fact, I have a copy of that book as well.
Right.
My father-in-law, I think, was the class president that year.
Could have been.
I believe.
Tell us who your father-in-law was.
Ken Razor.
Ken Razor. Lived on Durning Drive.
Correct.
And had, well, actually, he was a mechanic. And tell us a little bit about him.
Well, he was a mechanic. I think he had been a mechanic most of his life. I believe, had he had a choice, he would have been a farmer. He loved
Right,
getting
he
his
did.
hands in the dirt, and he loved the dairy end of things. But he had supported his family as a mechanic. In fact, I believe he had gone to schools with your brother,
Right, my
Hank,
brother.
years ago in diesel mechanics and so on. And as well as being a master mechanic on automobile and truck engines, he also got involved in small engine repairs. So he ran a business for 30 or 40 years.
And it's called Wadsworth Lawn and Garden
Service.
Right, on Durning Drive. Right. And then after he, quote, retired from the Wadsworth Lawn and Garden, he actually taught at Wadsworth High School in the auto mechanics, right?
Right.
My brother,
think he was there 16 years or so.
Something like that. My brother was an instructor, for mechanics for General Motors and also for Carter Carburetor. Of course, Carter carburetors are no longer used in cars, but many, many years ago they were. And Ken was one of his students at one time, and then they became very close friends, and an outstanding person, just really a gentleman. And he married Ruby what?
Ruby McElroy.
McElroy. It's also a very old family in Wadsworth, and they lived in the south part of Wadsworth. But where did you get, you say that you got a lot from the Eleanor Eiler Shapiro book.
I got a lot of information from her book. I also used the book that was written by one of the members of the Brown family
Frederick
in
Brown.
1874
Frederick
celebration.
Brown. And Frederick Brown was who?
I believe he was a nephew, is that right?
Of John Brown.
Right. And he did quite a nice job.
John Brown, the abolitionist.
Interesting to read, you know, if you read very carefully, you see a lot of his personality there and his opinions, but still there was a lot of very good information. And then the Medina County history text, you know, there's the series
Right.
that the state put out in the 19th century, had a great deal of information about the early people who lived in each of the cities in the county. So I got a lot of information there.
Actually, I was at the University of Akron for about 30 years, and the secretary to the president was Caroline Pardee, who was a direct descendant of the Pardee families here in Wadsworth. As a matter of fact, she's buried in Wadsworth. And for 30 years of our friendship, I heard about the Pardees all the way back to her great-great-great-grandfather. That would have been, she was born in 1911. Her father was born in 1860-something. His father was born in 1840-something. And his father was born probably in 1820 or something like that. I've forgotten the exact dates. But she had all of this written down, and she would tell me about it over and over and over and over and over again. So I had got a first-hand knowledge of this. We actually had her come to Wadsworth one time to come to one of our functions when we were having our 175th anniversary here in Wadsworth. And we recognized her as being the last of the Pardees of that family. And she is the last one buried in the Pardee plot at Woodlawn Cemetery. But go ahead, I interrupted you, and I shouldn't have.
A couple of other resources. One that was very, very good, and I'm sure that it's going to be a fine resource 50 years from now as well. Excuse me.
Too bad we didn't do this in the summertime when we would not all have colds.
Would be the genealogical sites that the Latter-day Saint Church, the Mormon Church,
Right.
has online.
How many,
Internet is
how
indispensable.
many million names do they have?
Oh my goodness. I know in Little Cottonwood Canyon near Salt Lake City, there's caverns that were dug back into the granite hillside. And I'm not sure how much room is in there, but they say they will have the records of every person ever born on the earth.
That's good.
I think they could hold it in there. It's amazing.
They actually dug out granite?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Granite's a little tough.
I believe it's probably close to what NORAD has in Colorado
my
Springs.
heavens, right.
You know, that sort of being able to withstand an atomic device,
I
that
would
sort of
imagine
thing.
so, right, yeah.
Incredible. But a lot of good information from them. And the LDS sites are usually quite friendly, you know, easy to use. So just about anyone can get on and plug in a name and go right to work with their sites.
That is so good, because when we were doing our 175th and 150th, we tried to get some of this information. Of course, computers were not invented at that time. Well, they might have been invented, but they certainly were not nearly so profuse as they are today. And we had to depend upon just the written word. And the only really good written word was Frederick Brown's little book that he wrote in 1876 or something of that nature. Yeah, you know, we had our 200th anniversary this year. We had 175th 25 years ago, and we had 150th in 1964, and then we had the 125th in 1939. Before that, the only other one we had was the 60th one. And the reason we didn't have a 50th anniversary in 2064 was that there was a civil war going on, and we couldn't do it. So they postponed the the pardon me, they postponed the festivities until the 60th anniversary. So we have had only the 60th, 125th, 150th, 175th, 200th, and we're hoping that people will continue to do that because Wadsworth has a very, very rich history, and it'll be lost unless people continue to do this. This is the reason we're doing these programs, so that we can have this documented for posterity. Now, Ramona, when you were growing up, were you aware of the fact that your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was the first one here?
Yes.
And tell us what your family thought about that.
I must have known about it, obviously, because I was about 3 years old for the first one that I went to.
That was the 125th?
Well, it was 1939.
That's the 125th, yeah.
But my family told us about it, but that was it. They didn't give us a lot of history or anything. Mm-hmm. And so later, I went to Medina Historical Society, or genealogy, I think. So I went through all kinds of records up there in the courthouse and through different things there, looking at births and deaths and different things, trying to trace it all back. It's a lot of work.
Did were your teachers aware of the fact that you were of the original family?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they really thought it was important until much later.
When did you
25 years later, when we had another celebration.
What did you have any kind of recognition for your family for the 150th, for instance, or 125th?
No.
No, nothing.
No, not really.
What about the 175th?
No.
So this is the first time.
First time since when I was in 39. Our pictures were in the Beacon Journal, and a big article about it then, but nothing more until this one.
Until this one.
Yes.
Well, it's hard to believe that they would not have recognized that all these years.
They didn't.
Because I mean, it's really uncanny to have anybody still living from the original family to living in Wadsworth. Terry, one of the things that you did in your lifetime, and this is going to tie in with what we're doing today. Tell us a little bit about your military life.
Oh my. Well, I alluded to it earlier that I had studied chemistry and I was pre-med and looking into a veterinary career. That was my goal, and found that
but then Sue came along, right?
Well, actually, no. What happened was I was from the wrong state.
Oh.
The state of Utah did not have a veterinary school.
Oh, really?
And to get into veterinary school as an out-of-state student,
Very
at least
difficult.
at that time, was extremely difficult. And I had a couple of friends who were ahead of me in college by a year or two, who ended up getting PhDs in animal husbandry as they were waiting to be accepted. So the handwriting was on the wall. And then Vietnam came along, and so I went and talked with my friendly recruiter, and they looked at my prerequisites, the pre-med, and I got into a dietetics program with the military as a student. And fortunately, that time counted towards a career. So
Well,
at any rate, I spent 22 years active, bouncing all around the world in various hospitals. Seeing patients, direct patient care, running food service operations, and doing layout and design of kitchens and actually hospitals in a couple of cases.
now you have omitted one of the things that I wanted to hear you talk about.
What was that?
Your rank.
My rank? Well, I did make the lieutenant colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Yes.
That is up there. Right.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel. Now, as a Lieutenant Colonel, retired, how did that fit into what you had to do with 1,000 people shouting in your ear, "Oh, look at me, look at me, and look at me"? And how did you? What were you able to do with that? With your background as a military officer?
Well, I think I learned very early on in my life that the job came first, and outside distractions don't bother me a whole lot. You know, in my personal life, perhaps I do, but when it comes to doing business, so I don't think there was much of a
Could I help you on a little bit?
Okay.
Right. And God love them. They're just wonderful people. But, you know, if a person is eager to know about his or her background, he or she will not give you any peace. One of the things that I noticed when I watched you work, and others noticed when they watched you work, was that you had the ability to say, just a minute, I'll get to you when I can. But you didn't have to even say it. I don't know whether it was your eyes or whether it was your demeanor or whether it was your silence, but there was an undying respect from these people. I went to one of the meetings where everyone was talking at the same time, and all of a sudden you cleared your throat, and instantly there was dead silence. So you have that aura of authority, and it was particularly necessary for excuse me, particularly necessary for working with other volunteers. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons you're able to hold that up just for a second to see how thick it is.
Yeah.
See how thick it is. That's a good inch thick. So you have about 100 pages there, don't you?
Yes.
Probably 100 pages. To be able to get all of those documented from the hundreds and hundreds of people who were at your left ear and right ear all the time. So as far as I was personally concerned, and I think we're all students of administration one way or another, but as far as I was personally concerned, I thought that the fact that you had been a lieutenant colonel and you were expecting people to respond as you would want them to respond certainly helped you. Let's get back to Ramona here once again. Something that you said a little while ago has me a little bit disturbed, that no one has made any kind of a mention of this. The fact that, you know.
I think we had our pictures put in one of the Wadsworth history books. I've loaned mine out, so I don't have them right now.
Well, I wrote.
But nothing else was done.
I wrote one, and I did put the whole family in there
Right.
at that time.
When you were a child? Pictures as a child?
No, this
I've seen
is
that
older
someplace.
because my grandchildren are in the two older grandchildren.
I think that I included
So
you in
that'd be
the.
25 years ago.
I included you in the book that I wrote because I think it's extremely important to have this thread. It's the only thread we have. The only
Right.
thread we have. But you stopped short of giving a little bit of the history of your father's family, the Edith part, which of course is the one that is related to the Deans. Your father unfortunately passed away when?
In 1958, he was 42 years old.
42 years old. I know him very well. He was a chemist.
He was a chemist. Now, he graduated from Wadsworth High School, went to what we called the Chemical, which was the Columbia Chemical Company in Barberton. I don't know what he did when he first started there. Of course, I wasn't around. But he became a chemist. Never went to school at all. But they classed him as a chemist.
I have a neighbor who now would be probably 110 years old, who went to the Columbia Chemical Company, and he went to the 8th grade, that's all. And he became not only a chemist, but he also became the general manager of the Corpus Christi branch of the Columbia Chemical. And this is extremely important. We did not necessarily have to have a formalized education.
Right, he graduated from high school at 16. Yeah. He was 16 in May and graduated a week or two later.
Right. The I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, but I think that we didn't start really looking for people to have degrees in the areas in which they were working until after World War II. Does that sound right?
I think you're probably right.
Yeah. Because we did not have to have a degree to do many of these things. Many people went to the 8th grade, period. That was it.
You learn by doing.
Right, and going to school to the 12th grade was almost unheard of, just as today, well, not unheard of, but it was a real accomplishment. Just as today, going to college is an accomplishment. But that was an accomplishment. Many people, my neighbors, I have many neighbors who went only to the 3rd or 4th grade when I was growing up. And they were gainfully employed. They didn't have to have an education. So, as your words, they learned by doing.
See, my father's parents were Walter and Margaret Edith. She was a clerk. Claude Edith was Walter's brother, and Claude's wife, Emily, was Margaret's sister.
So they were double cousins there somewhere along the line.
You know, brothers married sisters.
Brothers married sisters, right. And Claude was not an educated person, but he was one of the executives of the match shop.
I don't know if he ever went to college or not.
I don't think he did. I knew I knew Claude Edith. I mean,
I knew who he was, but as some people have said, Emily was difficult to be around.
Oh, really?
She was not a happy person.
Oh, well, those things happen. One of the things
even
that
her granddaughter Jill will say that.
Oh, really?
Jill Parker.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we'll accept that, and hopefully her history will show that they made some very valuable contributions to the city of Wadsworth.
Yes, they did.
And they made a lot of contributions to the city of Wadsworth. If you were going to, Terry, if you were going to advise the people in 2064 of a way to approach this, now understand that technology in 2064 is going to be far more advanced than what it is today. And we think that it's so advanced today that it can't get any better, but it will be.
Oh.
We know that that's going to happen. What would you tell them? How would you tell them to start? Because would they start with what you have and then build upon that? Or do you think that by that time that there's going to be some kind of a I don't know, a DNA kind of a thing that will be able to identify people and put it on a computer? I don't know. What do you think?
I'm getting these visions of Big Brother. You know, they probably know who we are at all times. But really, I think using the same resources that I did, and if this can become a resource, this would be a good place to start.
And just add on to yours
Add on.
as generations. Yeah.
One of the things that I think that people need to be very, very careful of, and I think I found this when I was doing research on the books, was that if you use letters, you really can't use them as truthful. Being truthful.
Yes.
Because people write things in letters which they may or may not know anything about. I'll give you an example. This is not in letters necessarily, but in 1928, in October of 1928, the Wadsworth Salt Company burned down. We have 3 different newspaper accounts of the event with 3 different dates, and one of them is in a different year.
Wow.
So we have to be very, very careful about those things. In history, when trying to write history books, you have to have triangulation. You have to have at least 3 different kinds of bits of evidence so that it actually points to the right conclusion.
On that same line, when I went to Medina reading census from way back, people wrote very fancy, so you couldn't tell their S's from their F's sometimes. Sometimes names were spelled wrong. Like my great-grandmother, I know, was Lydia because I knew her. But if you went through census, sometimes she was Liddy, and sometimes she was Lyd, and sometimes she wasn't even mentioned because wife wasn't important. So, yeah, records aren't great.
No, they aren't. So you have to be very careful about that.
Yeah.
And what you did, however, was to go on to not only the computer, but you also did some research with books, which of course is might be a little bit more accurate. particularly Frederick Brown's book. He was, first of all, supposedly a very intelligent person, but he also had that attitude that whatever he wrote was going to be gospel. I mean, that's what his grandson or his nephew said of him. John Brown, the abolitionist, came to Wadsworth very often just to be at Uncle Frederick's knee, because that's where he learned everything that he knew. John Brown's father, who was Frederick's brother, Owen Brown, was not an educated person. And so that's why Frederick came here, or rather why John Brown came here to have Frederick teach him. So whatever you would find in John Brown's, or rather in Frederick Brown's book, is going to be pretty accurate.
That book makes such interesting reading. If you read it, you find out they had people speak for an hour or so at a time, and hundreds of people sat there and listened.
Yeah, they had more respect than they do now.
Yes,
right
absolutely.
Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, during that very solemn occasion when we were identifying the people from Wadsworth, people milling around and dancing and things of that nature, we've got a little bit less formal and all the things. We have only about a minute left to go, but one of the things that we do at the end of each one of these programs is to ask the people who are here to say what they think the people in 2014 should or should not do. Ramona?
In 2064?
2064.
I think they need to spend 3 or 4 years planning.
Right.
And try to include as many people as possible. If they want to be on a committee, find a good fit spot for them and have them work.
And all of them have to work.
But if they want to be on it, they will work. And if they don't,
tell them to stay home.
Exactly.
How about you, Terry? You have just a couple seconds.
I just might mention, I did have this bound, and there's a copy at the Wadsworth Historical Society.
Okay.
So hopefully that'll be in their records 50 years from now.
That's a good
too.
point.
So that might be helpful.
It would be nice to have one in the library too.
We can do that. They'll put one there in the historical aspect, or the historical room.
Historical room, yeah, because not everybody can get to the Johnson House when it's open.
But as an approach to the next celebration, I'm not sure I have a lot of advice, but I would say that I was so taken with the community spirit when I first moved to Wadsworth that that's one of the reasons I'm still here. But as volunteers, it was the volunteers that made this go.
Oh,
we
absolutely.
are so grateful for what you did. Thank you very, very much. We have run out of time.
Yep, we did. But you're right.